started on a Tuesday afternoon. Quiet, gray-skied, the kind of day where most people keep their heads down and their thoughts to themselves. At precisely 2:43 p.m., Jack Dalton, retired special operative turned mechanic, stepped into Brewster's, diner off Route 17. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, didn't say much, didn't have to. That's the kind of man he was. But the silence didn't last long. A patrol car screeched to a halt outside. Within seconds, 2 local deputies stormed, hands hovering too eagerly over their belts. "Jack Dalton?" one of them barked. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Used to be. You're under arrest, step outside." No warrant, no explanation. Just cold metal cuffs snapping around his wrists. He didn't resist. Jack had nothing to hide. But the silence in that diner grew heavier than lead. He was hauled out like a fugitive, driven 3 miles to the county station, tossed into holding without a single charge read out. 7 minutes later, just 7, a convoy of black SUVs tore down Main Street. Doors slammed. Agents in dark suits swept into the building like a storm front. And just like that, everything changed. Because Jack Dalton wasn't some drifter. He was once the man the government called when the world quietly fell apart behind closed doors. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and stay with us. Because what happened next at that tiny rural station is the kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about loyalty, justice, and what it means to carry secrets that were never meant to surface. Jack Dalton had spent most of his adult life working in shadows cast by bureaucracies. No one talked about in polite company. He wasn't a household name. He wasn't meant to be. For 23 years, Jack operated in the gray space between intelligence and action, where decisions were fast, clean, and untraceable. But 5 years ago, he walked away. He left it all behind after one operation cost him more than the agency was willing to admit. A town in Montenegro, a fire no one reported, a young woman who never made it home. Her name was Mary Caldwell, Jack's last mistake. And the kind of guilt that doesn't just fade, even if you try to bury it under wrench grease and oil rags in a quiet auto shop on the edge of nowhere. He settled in Brenton, Tennessee, a town so small most maps forget it. Jack opened a garage, fixed cars, and drank black coffee. He didn't smile much, didn't talk about the past. The locals liked him enough to leave him alone, and that was all he needed. But somewhere along the chain of whispered intelligence and redacted files, someone hadn't let go of Jack's name. Someone somewhere wanted him quiet. So when the Brenton County deputies came through that diner door, it wasn't coincidence. It was a trigger. And Jack, though long retired, knew that kind of knock when he heard it. It wasn't about a traffic ticket. It wasn't mistaken identity. This was personal, and more dangerous than the uniforms arresting him could possibly understand. What Jack didn't know yet was just how deep the setup ran, and who had whispered his name into the wrong. He was back at the county station. Deputy Frank Harlan leaned against the wall with the self-importance of a man used to power in small doses. He'd been the one to radio in the anonymous tip that Jack was harboring a federal fugitive. Of course, he hadn't seen any such person. But he didn't need to. The call had come from someone high enough that Frank didn't question. Sheriff Langley, older and war-worn, wasn't so sure. He knew Jack, had even brought his truck in for repairs last winter. "Doesn't strike me as the fugitive harboring type," Langley had muttered, watching Jack sit silently behind bars, hands folded, eyes calm but unreadable. Meanwhile, Jack said nothing. He didn't argue, didn't ask for a lawyer. He just waited, because years of deep field work had taught him one unshakable truth. When the story doesn't add up, don't speak. Listen. And what Jack heard, in whispers and hallway chatter, didn't sit right. No record of charges filed. No communication from state or federal authorities. Just a name, his, inserted into a system that didn't seem to know what to do with it. Then, at exactly 2:57 p.m., everything turned. A sudden buzz on the sheriff's radio. Distorted but urgent. "This is Agent Rhodes, Department of Federal Security. Stand down. Do not move the detainee. Repeat, do not move Dalton." Seconds later, the building shook with the arrival of Black Tire Authority. Agents swept. Do not badges flashed. Not FBI, not local PD, higher, cleaner, quieter. Agent Rhodes entered without knocking. He pointed to Jack's cell. Open it now. Frank resisted. Rhodes didn't blink. He's not your suspect. He's our asset. And in that moment, every smug assumption inside that sheriff's office turned to ice. Sheriff Langley stood, frozen as Agent Rhodes unlocked the cell himself. Jack stepped out, his expression unreadable, eyes sweeping the room like a man mapping exits by instinct. Langley spoke, low and cautious. Mind telling me what's going on here? Rhodes didn't. Look at him. Need to know. Right now, Sheriff, you don't. That didn't sit well with Langley. He wasn't a man to be pushed around, even by suits from Washington. But Rhodes's badge bore the seal of a department that technically didn't exist. The implications sank in. Outside, black SUVs idled with the kind of hum that told locals to stay behind closed curtains. Inside, a heated exchange unfolded behind the locked door of the sheriff's office. Jack sat quietly in the corner, listening. The suits weren't just here to clear his name. They were panicked, whispering about an asset breach, something classified, that had somehow gone public. Rhodes finally turned to Jack. We need you back just for 72 hours. Jack laughed once, cold and humorless. You burned me 5 years ago. You think I forgot? Rhodes stepped forward. This isn't about what you remember. It's about what's coming. Someone reopened Operation Lantern. Files that were never supposed to exist are now moving through private channels. Someone's targeting assets. You're next. Jack narrowed his eyes. Then why arrest me? Rhodes didn't flinch. Because someone inside flagged you. We're running dark. We needed to see who would move when your name hit the wire. Jack understood now. He'd been bait. Bait to draw out whoever was leaking. But that meant someone close, someone still in Brenton, had betrayed him. And the hunt, he realized, had just begun. For the first time in years, Jack Dalton felt the weight of his old life crack open again. It wasn't the handcuffs or the agents. It was the knowledge that someone he once trusted had put his name out there. In his line of work, betrayal was more intimate than friendship. It stayed with you, carved behind the ribs where the past never quite healed. Back in his garage later that night, after the agents pulled strings to have him released without explanation, Jack stared at a wall of rusted tools and worn photos. One in particular, Mary Caldwell, stared back. Her smile frozen in time, her face still young. She died because he followed protocol. Because he trusted command. Now he was being asked to do it again. Rhodes had left him with a burner phone and 2 names. No backup, no promises, just a whispered warning. Find out who flagged you, or you won't see next week. Jack opened the garage's hidden panel. Inside, a metal case covered in dust. Not weapons, files, names, contacts. One folder marked in faded ink. Caldwell Mary. Final debrief. He hadn't opened it in 5 years. But something told him now was the time. Inside were notes he'd never seen. Phrases redacted, and a name circled twice in thick black ink. Marshall Greer. Greer had been Rhodes's second-in-command, a man Jack hadn't heard from since Montenegro. Could it be that simple? Could Greer have turned, or worse, never left? The betrayal wasn't random. It was personal, strategic. Time to draw Jack out. And now that he was out, the ghosts of his past had begun to stir. He didn't want back in. But someone was pulling strings from the shadows, and Jack Dalton never left a thread dangling. The morning after his release, Jack sat on the hood of an old '67 Mustang, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the town wake up like nothing had happened. To Brenton, he was just the quiet mechanic again, the man who rarely spoke unless spoken to. But under that still surface, calculations churned. He made his first move just after dawn, visiting Maybelle Tanner, the town's unofficial information broker disguised as a second-hand bookshop owner. If something moved through Brenton, Maybelle had heard about it. Funny thing, she said, dusting off a stack of paperbacks. Your name's been on a few too many lips lately, Jack. He leaned in. Who asked? She slid a scrap of paper across the counter. No names, just a time, a location, and one word. Shipment. A lead. That night, Jack followed it to an abandoned freight yard on the outskirts of town. There, he spotted a man in a dark coat passing a silver case to someone Jack hadn't seen in years, Marshall Greer. Greer looked older, sharper somehow, like a man who had learned to thrive in the shadows even after the agency let him go. Jack stayed out of sight, close enough to hear Greer speak. "No, I don't care what Rhodes knows. He's 2 steps behind." Dalton took the bait. Exactly as planned. It chilled Jack more than he expected. The betrayal was confirmed, but the conversation that followed turned everything sideways. Greer wasn't working alone. He mentioned someone else, someone inside the town, someone Jack knew. He returned to the garage that night with answers, and a fire in his chest that hadn't burned in years. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. Now, he had names, targets, and one more thing, a plan. Jack's phone buzzed at 2:12 a.m. A single word lit the screen. Move. Rhodes? Jack didn't wait. He grabbed the go bag buried beneath the garage floorboards and left through the alley. Minutes later, headlights lit up the front of his shop, 2 unmarked sedans pulling in slow, cautious. Whoever they were, they didn't knock. Jack was already gone. He drove 3 towns over to an old motel he knew from his transport days. There, under the flickering sign of the Red Fern Inn, he met Rhodes face to face again. "Their cleaning house," Rhodes said, voice low. "Greer's not just selling intel. He's reactivating names, burned assets, compromised agents. You weren't supposed to survive that pickup. He's tying off loose ends." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And what's the town's role in all?" "This," Rhodes hesitated. "Brenton's been a shell town since '06, a cover for a storage facility. There's a vault beneath your garage. You ever wonder why you never got permits denied?" Jack's blood ran cold. He'd been dropped into Brenton not by accident, but by design. "You placed me?" Rhodes didn't answer. He didn't need to. "You used me as a failsafe. We needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. You fit." It was all a lie. His garage, his peace, even his exile. It had been written into a playbook long before he arrived. And now Greer wanted that vault. Not the contents, the encryption key still embedded in the neurochip Jack received in Montenegro. They hadn't just burned him. They'd made him the last key to secrets that should have died 5 years ago. The second wave was no longer coming. It had arrived, and Jack Dalton had to decide whether to run or bring the storm down himself. Jack didn't sleep. He drove back to Brenton in the black hours before dawn, heart pounding like a war drum. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't fighting for an agency or a country anymore. He was fighting for clarity, for the truth buried beneath years of manipulation. At 5:04 a.m., Jack walked straight into the sheriff's station. Sheriff Langley, still in uniform from the night before, looked up in surprise. "Need a favor," Jack said. "And you're the only one in this town who might still have a shred of integrity left." Langley leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. "Talk." Jack laid it out. All of it. Operation Lantern, the false arrest, the neuro key, the vault. Buried beneath the garage Langley himself had recommended. To Jack's surprise, Langley didn't argue. He reached under the desk and pulled out a locked box. Inside, a series of encrypted files, ones the sheriff had been ordered to store and never access. "I don't like being lied to, Dalton, and I sure as hell don't like my town being used." Together they headed for the garage. They arrived, to find it already under siege. Greer's men, 4 of them, silent, armed, positioned like professionals. Jack didn't flinch. He grabbed Langley's old service radio and flipped it on. "Greer, I know you're listening." His voice cut through the static. "You want the key, come get it, but I don't think you're ready for what's behind that vault." Silence. Then finally Greer's voice. "You don't know what you're guarding." Jack exhaled. "Maybe not, but I know what I'm protecting it from." And in that moment, the final confrontation wasn't about winning. It was about who was still willing to stand for something real, when everything else had been sold. It ended not with gunfire or sirens, but with words. Jack stood in the center of the garage, vault door open behind him, encrypted core still intact. Greer stepped inside, hands raised, face worn, but eyes burning with conviction. "You really think you're the hero in this?" Greer asked. "They left us both for dead. They fed us lies. The only difference is, I chose to profit from it." Jack looked him square in the eye. "You chose to forget who you were. They didn't fight, they didn't yell." Jack simply handed over a slip of paper to Rhodes, who had just arrived behind Greer. It held the final piece, the access code. Rhodes read it, entered it into a handheld device. "The core deactivated. Data's safe," Rhodes confirmed. "Encrypted. And off-grid again. No one gets it, not even us." Greer looked broken. "You don't get it. That data could have changed everything. Toppled governments." Jack shook his head. "It would have destroyed people who didn't deserve it. Collateral damage always sounds noble until it's your neighbor, your family." Rhodes cuffed Greer without a word. Outside, the sun rose over Brenton like nothing had happened, but everything had. Langley watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "So what now?" Jack looked down at his oil-stained boots. "I go back to fixing engines." Rhodes stepped forward. "You could come back, run things the right way." Jack didn't answer. He just walked past them, back into the garage. He'd been used, betrayed, even manipulated into doing the right thing. But in the end, the choice had been his, and that's what mattered. Brenton may have been built on lies, but Jack Dalton had reclaimed his piece of truth, and sometimes that's enough. By the week's end, Brenton was quiet again. The garage was open. The same '67 Mustang idled in the bay. Jack didn't speak of what happened. The town didn't ask. But there was a different air when folks came by. More nods, fewer questions. A kind of mutual respect that doesn't need words. He'd seen the inside of systems built to collapse on their own weight. He'd seen men, once righteous, bend under the pressure of secrecy and ambition. And he'd learned that even the strongest can lose their way. Not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Greer was transferred without fanfare. The data was locked away again, its implications buried with it. And Rhodes disappeared just as quietly as he came. But Jack knew the world hadn't changed. There would always be another operation, another secret, another man like Greer waiting in the wings. Still, something had shifted. Jack had remembered who he was. Not the operative, not the tool, but the man. The one who still believed in lines that shouldn't be crossed, no matter the cost. And in that, there was peace. Not the kind that comes from justice or closure. The quieter kind. The kind that lets a man wake up, pour his coffee, and face the day without flinching. Because in the end, Jack Dalton didn't save the world. He didn't need to. He just protected the last part of it he still called home, and, for now, that was enough. If this story struck a chord or made you think twice about trust, loyalty, and what it really means to be used by the system, tell us in the comments. We read everyone, and let us know where you're watching from. Some stories don't need endings, just a reason to keep going.